Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here moderating this panel, and I have to commend CanBIM for organizing this forum. It's great to see such a focus on owners. Owners really are the critical link, not just in terms of, asking for BIM data and setting out the requirements, but also in terms of figuring out how do we organize projects so that we can actually get the data that we want in the way that we want it. So I'm going to be kind of leading the show here, and we are going to go through kind of the high points of BIM implementation, and also go through some of the trials and tribulations of trying to do this. And as someone who's been in this space for a long time, over 20 years, I've come to really appreciate the owner's side. So for my early career, I spent a lot of time looking at projects, and I thought, bringing all these different disciplines together, and that was really challenging and complex. And I've come to believe that actually the owners have it really hard. They're the ones that are really struggling with how to make sense of all this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through 4 different questions, really. We're going to start off by having each speaker talk about where they are now. What have they been doing on their projects? And then we're going to talk about how did they get to where they are? What were the critical steps? And then we're going to talk about the challenges. What were some of the real hills they had to climb, mistakes, missteps? What do they wish they could go back in time and do over again? Those kinds of things. And then we're going to talk about what's next. So that's the plan for the hour. I'll start off. We're just going to go down the row here, starting with you, John, talking about, where are you now? What's your current status?
Can I grab
Yeah,
this?
let's just move this over.
Sure. Okay. Okay, I'm afraid I'm the poster child here for the owners that know nothing about BIM. Where are we at now at UBC? Really, we've been taking a project-by-project approach to this. We started out probably 10 years ago working with Sheryl, actually, on a pilot project where the focus was really around using 3D modeling for design. And it was really simple. I mean, it focused on clash detection and, the obvious benefits around that. I think our big evolution in the use of BIM or 3D modeling was with our Brock Commons Tall Wood project, with all the obvious inherent risks and challenges with that project. We really knew that we needed to think carefully about our design approach, and we utilized 3D modeling extensively there, not only to model the design of the building, but the construction sequencing was a really big aspect of that. Trying to figure out how to most create a design that could be most efficiently and effectively constructed was a really big thing for us. We needed to assemble the wood structure of that building during the dry summer months, so it had to be a really quick sequencing for that assembly. And so we did a lot of modeling, figuring out sort of down to the minute how much time it would take to install each engineered wood component in that building. So the 3D modeling was really useful in that regard. And then translating the design model to the manufacturing process for StructureLam, the company that put together the engineered wood components for the building. They were able to import the data from the 3D model into their computer numerical manufacturing process. Which was a big time and cost saver. So, it was the benefits obviously are clear in terms of reducing cost, reducing time on the project, reducing waste. So for us, it was a no-brainer. We'll talk about our challenges next, but translating that to the operational is the next big thing for us.
Really going to pass the mic. Very good. So where are we today? Well, I guess the first thing I'll answer, where am I today? I know this is not an AA meeting and I'm not Catholic, but I do have a confession. You guys heard the oil and gas side of things, but basically I'm an Oilers fan living in Calgary, been invited to Canucks land here today, so I can give you a nod. You're in first place. What I won't do is take responsibility for your snowstorm. I didn't bring that to this side of the mountains, but Yes, thank you. With that said, I'm here representing VEERUM. VEERUM is a 5-year-old software company out of Calgary. It was initially, the mandate of VEERUM was to address the construction waste in the world, that $1.4 billion of waste that we have in industrial capital asset projects, whether it be schedule delay, quality, cost, those types of things. But very quickly, that was about 5 years ago, the inception. After we got in front of owners and clients and AECs and all the stakeholders, what we found was the biggest problem, 1.4 billion is a big problem, but the biggest problem was democratizing that data that everybody talked about, that data that resides in silos all around us. So what we did was we pivoted to a software solution that actually just brought all that data together so that non-subject matter experts could actually get access to that data and make decisions. That you heard of all of our previous speakers speak to that need for sure. And at VEERUM, what we really did, we have global customers. We modeled our mission after the European Union BIM guidelines that are actually coming into regulatory status now. And they talk about BIM having 4 maturity swim lanes. The first 2 being content and digitization, which as an industry, really, we do a really good job of that, identifying what we should have in our BIM ecosystem and really digitizing it. You think of 3D, 4D, I've seen some really cool 5D models now in the BIM ecosystem, but the other 2 swim lanes, we've got areas of improvement. And the European Union says that those 2 swim lanes are interoperability and collaboration, which I heard everybody talk about this morning. I mean, Oliver, I'm going to use the golden thread. Your royalty checks are going to be in Canadian dollars. Sorry, but that's the way it's going to be. But we really focus on interoperability. So at the highest maturity on that matrix, it talks about adding IoT sensors or information to all stakeholders to make it that smart asset for the whole life cycle for all stakeholders. And the collaboration side of it is making it accessible to all stakeholders in that ecosystem. So think of the power of design and engineering to collaborate with construction, operations, and maintenance, and also the public. When we go out there for our project approvals, we have social licenses, environmental sustainability, regulatory licenses. Our BIM ecosystem can be shared to all those stakeholders to the benefit of the project. Thanks.
Okay, Paul, City of Vancouver perspective.
Sure. I'll apologize now because I'm not very good with public speaking. I might work for the public sector, but I don't get out speaking with large groups very often because as a typical building operator, we tend to blend into the background and things just happen. And when things go well, nobody notices us. And that's really the intent of building operations, is to keep the building operating in a way that nobody notices the building has any problems and it just works. So where are we at now? So with the City of Vancouver, we are the largest property owner in Vancouver because we own parks and recreation centers, fire halls, police stations. But with that said, it's been, and we don't always deal with new inventory. So we often, I'm sure you guys have heard about the Balmoral that the city's about to acquire. And so we'll get a lot of these buildings that we need to operate. Is BIM applicable there? I'm not even sure, to be honest with you. But we also have some high-tech buildings like the TTC, which is our tactical training center that I'm sure most people don't know about because it's primarily used by law enforcement for their training exercises. So I guess, I would challenge you in that I probably know less about BIM than you do. But we have used one BIM project. But the reality is it was great when the project was in the design phase, and it was great that we could see how things were going to be built and where things would be located, and they showed us how the paths would walk through. But where we struggled was with the transition of that information into operations. And operations, from my perspective, it's not necessarily just about data. For operations, we generally look at how that building is going to be used. For example, if a building is designed to LEED standards or passive house standards, the minute people occupy that building and somebody's too hot or too cold, well, we throw LEED passive house out the window because we got to take care of the occupants in the building. We got to make sure that service is delivered inside the building. And I think so that all that great work done in the beginning is lost somewhere into operations. And what I'm hoping to learn from everybody here is how can we take that information there's a ton of information in BIM in the design phase. How can we take that information, leverage it for use so that we can understand how the building needs to operate and not do knee-jerk reactions like buy people personal heaters or window shakers or whatever the solution might be, but to actually use the data and the design intent to operate the building. And I think that's where there's a gap there right now.
Yeah. I would say many people understand that gap in this room. So now I'd like you to kind of speak to kind of your process in terms of how you've been sort of making incremental improvements along the way, learning along the way, and digitizing different aspects of project delivery along the way. And John, you talked about Tallwood House. That was, I don't know, almost 2 years ago now, and it's been written about extensively. So there's a lot of great documentation on that project if you want to learn more about it. But that was one project. And I know you guys have done a lot of digital delivery on other projects. So
That's
maybe
right.
you could speak to kind of how you're approaching this process
Right.
and learning along the way.
Right. How did that happen? And it has really been on a project by project basis. We've used local firm CAD makers a lot on our projects to do 3D modeling, 4D modeling in some cases. And, I think we've gotten there and we've been successful in that because we clearly understand the cost benefit equation. Like it's just on the design side and construction side, it's quite clear. And we've had, I would say quite enlightened project managers and we've had funding partners that have helped us in some cases. We have faculty partners who help us in some cases, which has been really good. So it really takes, I think, champions and early adopters to make inroads in this. It's all about the people. I mean, we could set in place great processes or standards, but if you don't have people that are really engaged in it and want to move it forward, it's not going to happen. So that's been, I think, a really important piece for us. And I guess conversely, on the operational side, that's been the challenge. And I won't go into details on the challenge now, but I think not fully understanding the cost benefit equation and maybe a sense of, on the operations side, of being a little bit overwhelmed with data is part of the problem that we're having, sort of making that translation. It's very interesting. I mean, we do collect a lot of data operationally in our buildings. We have very sophisticated data analytics on energy use in our buildings. We spend a lot of time working away on that, but I think there just isn't a sort of a connection with the teams in integrating everything together, which I think Peter and Carl so well put, right? It can be quite simple if you think about it in that conceptual framework, but we're struggling a little bit on that side to get there.
Can I just ask a bit more follow-up in terms of, because you mentioned people are the most important. We've been hearing a lot about data, information. So can you say more about how you're organizing your projects to make sure you get people's buy-in and support and early
Right.
engagement from trades or CAD makers or
Right.
whoever?
Well, I think on our most successful projects, and I'll come back to Brock Commons, it's been a bit of a benchmark for us, bringing together full design and construction teams right at the beginning of the project, right at the beginning of design has been a really important piece for us. So everybody's on the same page. And on Brock Commons, we had the key design folks there. We had the construction manager there. We had key trades there at the table right at the beginning, working on a design assist basis. And it really helped to have everyone there and all those ideas. And I think, instilling a philosophy around a project that you're trying to, we try to be innovative at UBC as much as we can. We try to push the bar on each project. Typically it's around the sustainability performance and energy performance of the buildings, or the use of sustainable building materials, just kind of trying to, push that bar. And I think we've kind of instilled that in our project managers, and a lot of the designers and contractors that work with us know that we're trying to do that. And so there's a little bit more receptivity to trying new things.
Yeah, great. Trevor, you've been working with a lot of owners, so maybe you could share some of the process that you've observed, and if possible, speak to this issue of cost benefit, because that is a challenging thing to understand for an owner.
Definitely. And I'm going to echo a little bit of what you just said there too, but it's ironic the number of tier one large customers that we go into. And initially in our process, what we do is we invite the stakeholders in a company into just a short gap assessment or value proposition workshop to define that golden thread asset visualization strategy. And it's interesting, you get 4 or 5 groups in a room, and sometimes it's the first time they met each other. So we'll have the engineering group there, the CAD group, the GIS group will be there type of thing, and we're introducing them to each other when they've got information that they could be sharing with each other. Operations the same way. They could be in the field with the UAVs, and data capture is a commodity now. So their operators and maintenance people are out there capturing pictures. They're flying their drones on their assets and their buildings during construction. That's all types of information that they have in their silo that they're not sharing. So really, people is the biggest thing, getting them together, defining what that golden thread could be so that they all get a return on the investment. And it's a significant investment that people make in these GIS, in these BIM ecosystems that these owners make. So show them that there is a cost benefit throughout the whole asset lifecycle and through each group. I think it was Carl that they were mentioning this morning. And we usually tackle one big pain point, and that's the handover of a project to operations and maintenance. McKinsey did a study 2 years ago, and I can't believe it's still the case, because I used to be in that industry 15 years ago. But 40% of information that is done during design and the project construction is either lost or very late handed over to operations. I mean, that's a huge pain point. And then operations and the owners are investing in new systems that they're starting from scratch or, at a deficit of at least 40% redoing. So focus on people, their personas, where is the data, answering the 3 questions that Peter and Carl talked about earlier. And the question we ask is, would you like to see it? Not because, by the way, each stakeholder group has a different need for that data, right? So engineers need their heavy duty CAD software. They like their Alienware hardware, desktop environments. Same with the GIS people with Esri and that type of stuff. But when you get to operations and maintenance, maybe they just need to see it visually. They need to see their work order on a tablet, in a truck, those types of things. So just answering those 3 to 4 basic questions.
Great, thanks. I actually thought it would be higher than 40%, so 40% seemed pretty good from what I've observed. So Paul, maybe you can share a bit about your journey with the city of Vancouver. And I know Trevor mentioned the handover process, which is something you guys have been looking at as well. So why don't you take us through how you've been approaching this?
So we have, in operations for decades, been struggling with the handover because as-builts come sometimes a year later. We sometimes don't get owner's manuals. And that makes it very difficult to set out your maintenance plan if you're operating a year without knowing exactly what you're working with. So we do have an ongoing process. So it's not that we haven't been doing it, we've been doing it, but we're actually working to formalize that process. And it's the project names actually changed from handover process to information exchange. Because really what we want to do is take the operators and have them input their thoughts into the design. And this is where BIM really added value to the one project we did have, was that they were able to visualize where the condenser would be, where they would have to access the roof, and if there were safety rails required. Because often in a 2-dimensional drawing, you see squares and rectangles and linear lines that show you pipes, but it doesn't actually show you how you're going to access the equipment and the risk that we would put our staff at if we were to ask them to work on the edge of the roof. So that has been proven really valuable, but that's all still very front loaded. That's still at the very early design stage. And that information, to be honest with you, hasn't been used again. And I think that's That's the struggle. So there's a project handover, which touches on BIM, not necessarily directly related to BIM, but I think it's all cyclical, meaning if you kind of take the operators who own it for the life of the building, bring them up front, have them advise on what they're looking for, use something like BIM to kind of show them what they're actually going to be working with, have them identify challenges of access to equipment, have them kind of identify even, hey, this route's, running this water pipe over the electrical vault, which is just below, is probably not a good idea. That gives the architects and designers a time to change that. So we're working on formalizing that process. It's not finalized, but there are probably right now about 25 touch points before the building even breaks ground for operations just to touch in and check in. The other issue, and this is maybe I'm going way off topic, that's why you should never invite me to speak publicly.
I think you're doing fantastic.
But excuse me. So on those touch points, and there's also checkpoints, because as operators, often they say, hey, I don't think that electrical vault should be located under your janitor closet. That goes up and information actually doesn't come back, meaning the operators have said it, the designers say, nah, okay, I heard them, but let's do it anyways. And then the building gets built and the operators get it and they're very frustrated because, hey, I told them the first time you get a sink leak, a caulking leak, or whatever, something leaks, you're now in a position where you may have to shut down the entire building because it's leaked into the electrical vault. All those things, those little things that aren't captured in a textbook, aren't captured in a design book, that aren't captured in anything, is really just through experience. The experience of the operator knowing that you can't put a condenser beside an overhead gate or above an overhead gate just because that's the only place left, because they'll never be able to service that unless they shut down the entire garage. And I use that not as a fictitious example, that actually happened. So every time we service those condenser units, guess what? We got to put security guards there. We got to redivert traffic. And all of that could have been changed if they just didn't put them there. And those kind of things are extremely valuable. So and this goes on to how do we quantify the value of BIM in operations? So those things that are captured in BIM it isn't easy to say, hey, I highlighted the condenser issue and had them relocated to a different location. And that resulted in X dollar of maintenance money down the road. I think that's the biggest challenge we have with using this technology, because there is a cost to this technology. Meaning, from an operator's perspective, there's benefit to having it, but we got to justify it in the business case to pay for it. To justify it usually means we got to come up with a benefit, either in cost savings or safety or efficiencies. And until we can quantify that, it's going to be very difficult to put that money up front. And because when I saw BIM, I got really excited. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I can't wait to put this in all the buildings. I don't care how much it costs. This is going to be great. And then, of course, once we received it, we were like, okay, yeah, but we still have to go clean the condensers. We know where they are now. They're in a better location. Great. But there's no savings to it. And I think that's, I'll keep talking forever, but that's part of the problem, is transitioning the benefit of that initial investment into a compounded saving throughout the life of the facility.
Great, thank you. And I see we're now transitioning into the challenges, which we could probably spend a good hour on, just talking about that, everyone's favorite portion of the program here. And I have to say that I've been getting the question, I did my first BIM project in '96, and I've been getting the question, how much will we save if we go to BIM throughout this entire time? And finally, a few years ago, I woke up and decided that I would turn it on that person, ask them a question, which is, how much do you spend on waste in your current process? Because if you don't know what your current process is, how much waste there is, how will you ever know what improvements you'll get from BIM? And so, we've heard now about drawings getting there a year late, which means a year of work is going into actually sending people out to buildings to figure out what is in my building. So I think we have to really understand what our current processes are and how much we're spending by not having BIM data before we can get to kind of understanding the return on investment. So I'm going to set that up and then ask my esteemed colleagues here to kind of comment on what they've seen as the challenges. We've heard about process challenges and people challenges. So data hasn't been as at the forefront as one might expect. So I don't mean to speak too long here, but I'd love to kind of hear kind of how are you perceiving the challenges with this transition?
All right. So it's multifaceted, I think, and it does come back to people in the end. But it's also a case of prioritization, time.
Yeah.
I think there's a real perceived complexity. So I think the people in the equation look at it and they go, oh my God, this is huge given all the other tasks on the agenda and priorities on the agenda. I know it's a big challenge. Set aside the cost benefit equation. It's just being able to, I think, convey how this benefits the tradesperson who's working on the tools, right? I think that's really one of the big challenges here, because intuitively, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. We have a very fragmented environment of data on buildings, but it's sort of how do you sort of make the next leap to integrate things together, and that's really perceived as too daunting. In some cases, the word too much information is used. That comes out, and I think there's ways of getting around that perception, but it's really just sort of getting it started in a way.
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest challenge. And so maybe we're just thinking about the problem on too big a scale, and we have to work through it on a project basis and just move beyond design and construction into the operations, just with one thing, to see how it works.
Yeah, and I have come to appreciate the scale of the problem at UBC, having interviewed, like we've done studies of UBC and the different units that are involved, and it is a huge challenge. Maybe you can say more a little bit about kind of how you are using pilot projects a bit. So Tallwood House was a pilot in a way.
Right.
And now, with the Bioenergy Research and Development Facility, it's another pilot. And so it's not that you're not doing things, it is, but I think that this is kind of how things happen, is like you incrementally try it out. Every project is an opportunity to innovate. And I know one of the other speakers talked about that as well. Yeah. So maybe you could say a little bit more about how you're using pilots.
Sure. So the Tallwood House, trying to move beyond just design and construction into operation. We put sensors through that building to measure various aspects of the performance of the wood structure, moisture sensors, vibration sensors. So we're collecting data on that. We have our typical energy management software. So we're trying to bring all of that together and use it in a cohesive way. I can't say that it's been clearly successful yet. There still is work to do. And I think, our opportunity though, moving forward is with a project we're working on with Sheryl on our bioenergy facility. We're expanding that facility, and there's an opportunity to basically utilize BIM in the early stages of design through construction into operations. And we're fortunate with that facility. It's an operational facility. And so the operations teams are involved in the design. In fact, they probably have their fingers too much in the design. They're very they're all over it. They're designing it basically. And so that's helpful because you've got those folks at the table. And I think that will, I'm hopeful that will help introduce the sort of the concept moving forward. But as I said, I think everyone intuitively gets it. Yeah. It's really a change management issue more than anything. So it comes back to the people.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And the project that he's talking about is funded through Campus as a Living Lab. So thinking about a living lab, and all of us involved in projects have this opportunity. Trevor, shifting gears, what have you observed? I know that you mentioned before that the pain point was handover, but maybe you can share more about the real struggles of owners that you've been working with.
By the way, that's one pain point is the handover, right? it's one of the biggest ones. But I will echo the change adoption, change management, cultural change is still a big barrier to BIM extension or adoption throughout the whole multi-stakeholder asset life cycle type of thing. And I will say, the other one that comes to mind, and I'll say it, but I see it improving drastically, especially over the last couple of years, is the status quo. People saying, well, this is the way we did it forever, but you're not getting the good results forever too. So that acknowledgement that there is a need for change is becoming more and more commonplace. Status quo on, I'm an older male up here, so I will say it. Cultural demographics changing is now facilitating the adoption or the eagerness to adopt and try to find a point solution versus my generation wanted to have an enterprise solution, solve everything or do nothing type of thing. So we're really finding with technological advancements, younger generations coming up with a different skill set, the economic downturn for various industries, social responsibility is now becoming a catalyst for us to get rid of the status quo and try some of these point solutions. It might be a pilot. It might be just linking two groups together in an organization versus a whole enterprise platform solution. So, that's kind of where I'm seeing it now.
Great. And Paul, you've been mentioning a few challenges that you've been encountering in your own process. I don't know if there's any others that you'd like to highlight now.
How much time do we have?
Not enough.
Yeah. No, I think that certainly I'm not smart enough to design a system like BIM. BIM is a very complicated system. But you think of the effort put into designing a system like BIM and rolling it out and implementing it. I actually think that changing the people is harder.
Yeah.
It's the cultural shift of not only operators, but architects to be inclusive of the operators in their design process. That was a cultural shift that we had to do at the City of Vancouver, because designers and architects wanted to design what they wanted to design and very rarely solicited the input of the operators. But that has changed. So, I agree with you completely that there's a new generation workforce coming in. I'm also one of the older guys, just so you know. And so we've implemented things like handheld technology. We want to make drawings available for the staff who are out on site and then they're troubleshooting something. They don't have to call somebody to fax them something or to come back to the shop to look at drawings. But trying to make that available on an 8-inch or handheld is also challenging. So while we're moving ahead with some technologies to make things what we think are better, some technologies aren't there yet in terms of access to that data. There's also the challenge of that cultural shift that we all talked about a little bit, which is, how do I tell my operator to, instead of flipping through his drawings and going M1, M2, and knowing exactly what he needs to look for, to now go to a computer and use mouse clicks to search for the same thing. There's an educational component to that, but there's also just there's a big shift for that employee. So it's not that it's not possible. It's not that it's not worth doing. I strongly believe it's worth doing, but I think that is the next biggest challenge, short of designing BIM, but actually getting out and shifting that culture into using it. One of the biggest steps, though, to that shift, in my mind, is getting that operator to be involved with BIM at the design. Because if they can see it, if they can see the BIM being built, if they can participate in it and they can actually say, hey, this should move or that should move, oh, I didn't realize that, that will go a long ways into that operator at the end of the day, accepting BIM as something that he participated in constructing. So that's what we're trying to do in every instance, is bring the operator to the very forefront. As soon as the project becomes a concept, we want that operator involved to hear him out, hear what's going to be needed, and then go from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that thinking about that tradesperson on the ground is very hard to figure out how to support. And I do think there are a lot of great tools emerging. Like we've done some testing with maintenance professionals at UBC where we brought them in and they had VR on and they were looking at it and they were very skeptical about VR being able to help them. But by the end of the scenarios, they were like, oh my God, this is so easy. Why don't we do this all the time? So there's, tools that are emerging that can really help to provide that input. So the next part is going to be on what's next. And I know that this is a huge, complex issue. And so maybe if you can think about, like, what are one or two pilot projects, either that you want to do or you are doing or you'd like to do to kind of get you on that path a little bit further ahead. So if you can think about it in that way, like what are a few of the next steps? Because it is just this monumental, complex challenge.
Yeah. So at UBC, I think there's an opportunity for us to come at it from two levels, both from sort of a macro level as well as from the grassroots. And at the macro level, it really has to do with the fact that we're currently in the process of renewing our enterprise system at UBC. So we're implementing this huge new finance and HR and student system for the university, which is a massive undertaking. And at the same time, we're also updating our enterprise maintenance management system or computerized maintenance management system. So huge opportunity there. The university is looking at kind of the data governance model and so thinking about that sort of opportunity is pretty exciting. It's just trying to get this, BIM into that equation. It may be a second phase of that or a second tier of that, but there's certainly an understanding that we need to do a better job of integrating systems. We're very fragmented at the university. We have all the, the pieces, Archibus and, the maintenance management systems and the CAD and we have BIM. We have a license for Revit. Yeah.
Well, you're on your way then. Isn't that all you need?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, it's taking the opportunity with these pilot projects, like the bioenergy expansion. I think is a really great opportunity, and it's great. The work that you're doing with our maintenance staff is terrific, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that we have to get people really pushing from the trades level to use. We've implemented various different systems where we use radio frequency ID tags, that sort of thing, and half of the trades love it, and the other half just keep using the paper, and they're fine not to bother with their their handheld devices. They just want the paper printout, and they'll go out. And a lot of them know where everything is because they worked on campus for 20 years. So, so it's sort of that change management piece of it that needs to be worked on. But I think there's still opportunity there to kind of move forward with that project in particular. And then it's really, the next piece is how can the industry help? Like how can we? And I guess it's really about the cost benefit, the kaboom on the operations side, which is, I don't think we really quite understand it, actually. The cost savings element or the reduced, process waste. It's not really understood that well. On construction, design and construction, it's way better understood, I think.
Yeah.
So those are my thoughts.
Thanks. And Trevor, if you can share, maybe it's just your advice about what owners can do in terms of next steps and addressing these people and process challenges.
My advice to owners, and again, half my career was on that side, is to really just embrace a point solution, take a pilot, fail fast type of thing. But it's incredible what you can do to advance not only BIM, but the return on investment for BIM. We've got lots of pilots going on with clients right now. Two big exciting ones, and I don't want to freak anyone out, but we have a tier 1 asset owner, a tier 1 EPC, and we're doing, through our solution, they're doing agile engineering while construction's underway. So engineering will issue a 2-week CAD drawing of what's to be completed. Operations will complete it, and on a daily basis, they provide feedback in reality back to the engineering group, and changes are made, such as some of the things that the pain points that you're bringing up. So while they're constructing it, we're taking a digital capture of the facility as it's being constructed, and it's being fed back into engineering with construction and operator oversight. So that's a fantastic pilot. Another pilot is one company is using our platform pre-construction, even pre-feed. It's at the FID state, and they're using our platform to display the BIM model for the project for public consultation and awareness and feedback. So my advice to owners is just, don't address everything at once. Pick your biggest pain point, pick a couple solutions, do the pilots, and think of the people first.
Great advice. Paul, any last words there?
Sure. So in my mind, we talked about finance, and I talked about finance, but I want to be clear that finance isn't the only hurdle. The justification for cost benefit is not the only hurdle. In my mind, there's actually three, finance being the leading one because that happens at the front. And the one at the end is that cultural change for operators to use BIM. But in the middle there's also a sustainability concern as well. Meaning we have all these experts who work with BIM, they build the data sets, but through the life of a building, it changes. Things get added, things get removed, the use of the space changes. And that has to be somehow input back into the BIM model. And I'm not, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not aware of an easy avenue for that yet. Is that you?
That's
right. But yeah, but even simple things like understanding that resource is available is helpful for me as representing at least the city of Vancouver to understand that we're going to pay for a system, we're going to use a system, and this system isn't going to become outdated in 5 years or whatever time it is. If we could kind of help address those three, then that would ease my concerns as the owner for a lot of what this is, because right now what it feels like is just an additional investment for construction and design. And I really want to understand and learn how it can be used operationally and how to sustain this.
Great. So we have about 10 minutes left. So I'd like to open this up for questions from the audience. Or I can just keep asking questions, but that gets boring. Great, Yuri.
Do I need a mic or can you just yell?
Well,
I'll just yell.
no. We've got many.
Yeah, that would be great.
Got lots of.
Okay, thank you. So I heard what you were saying when it comes to involving operators early on, and I'm a huge advocate for that. Although I'm going to try and stir the pot a little bit. And, on the other side of things, there's financiers and project managers that say getting operators involved also drives up cost and delays design. And there's a lot of other issues that come to that. So what is your approach to that? And do you have any cost mitigation suggestions when operators get involved?
So
That's a good stirring of the pot. I like it.
well, no, because I appreciate that your question earlier about, okay, it costs this. Well, what are your costs now? And it is really doing that, because once you're able to articulate that whichever example you want to talk about, we have enough buildings to justify that a poor design results in significant operating costs. For example, those condensers I talked about located above the garage door, we ended up having to relocate it because the risks involved in the downtime for the building were just massive. That was very easy to quantify. And when you quantify that cost, now they're relocated, and every time we clean that, we don't have to shut the building down. That cost is once you project it out over the life of the building, not even the life of the building, 25 years, it is monstrous compared to the initial cost of probably 20 hours time for your one operator to multiply it by 10 operators. So you got 200 hours times, it doesn't matter. 200 hours now, saving exponentially over the next 25, 50 years of the building is a very easy business case to justify in terms of time. Now, so that's the time investment, which we've done a lot of work on. We've been successful with that. Where I talked about with BIM though, the challenge still remains, well, once we've relocated, we've invested your time at the beginning, how is BIM helping long term? That's the cost benefit analysis that maybe we haven't done as good.
Any questions? I'm here.
I have a lot of questions. I don't know where to start. But first of all, Paul, you speak very well. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't put yourself down. I guess I'm going to start with the two, Paul and John. My first question would be, given what Trevor said about the 40%, or as you said, probably more, do you ask for the data to be delivered at the end of the project? Or do you somehow just expect it?
Pray.
That would be my question, number one. And the same could go to the two of you, given that you work in the same organization, probably different departments, but.
Well, the data is an absolute project requirement. And what we have a challenge with is just getting, CAD drawings out of design teams. It can take a year after a project's done to get a proper record drawing or as-built drawing. That's an industry issue.
Well, there are people in this room that specialize in making sure that data is provided.
Yeah, no, fair enough. We have all the financial incentives for it to happen. We have holdbacks. We struggle to get data. I'd love to sort of hear some comments from any designers in the crowd on that. Because
I don't think the designers are here. That was another question I had to the room of how.
yeah, that's a huge huge
Not so
issue.
much.
And so the question, I guess, is how does BIM help that?
So is it a contractual?
100%.
Well, no, BIM is not a contractual.
BIM isn't, but just
The drawings.
Just the data, the design,
Yeah.
drawings and data, which you would expect. It's an absolute contractual requirement. There's holdbacks. We still don't get the information.
Maybe you're not holding back enough.
I did have one other question for Paul. Your example of the condenser, and that's quantifiable. The problem comes when you don't have a problem because BIM eliminated the problem. How do you quantify a
Yeah.
problem that never happened?
Problems avoided.
Right? So you have to look at I think you have to look at those issues that happened in other projects and say, what if we didn't have these? Because otherwise, all you're doing is saying, we've solved the problem, but how much would it have cost if we had the problem?
So involving operators in the beginning is just something that I feel we must do now. It's not an option to defer that. So that was really to answer the question about how do we go about getting operators involved early in the project, despite there being a cost to the project. But I agree completely that if BIM is used properly, there should be no problems. I started off talking about, hey, if we're good operators, nobody notices us. BIM is actually it's the same concept. If BIM works, actually nobody knows it's there. And that becomes you're almost shooting yourself in the foot. It becomes cyclical, but at the end of the day, operators are needed. BIM is needed. It's just quantified. So that is one of the three challenges that I talked about is how do you take something that you do so good a job at, which results in savings that nobody notices, and then you're asked to quantify that. It's like, well, the sky didn't fall. How do you want me to tell you the sky didn't fall? Our life, yeah.
And actually, just to follow up on that, there was two comments that that really resonated with me. One of them actually was Sheryl, you mentioned was, and this reflects your comments, was to answer the question of how much can I save using BIM. Firstly, you have to ask how much
Waste is
spending
there
on
in your
waste.
current process.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we do a poor job of
Yeah.
asking.
Yeah.
That we could really then see the benefits of utilizing BIM. And the second point that really resonated with me was by Trevor, point solutions as opposed to an enterprise solution. I think that's something that the industry is guilty of trying to fit an enterprise solution to a problem, but because the problem is so complex and varied, our enterprise solution is very poor in addressing those needs. So those are just two of the
Two
points that really
observations. I think there's a question in the back, and then I'm going to see if this is working.
Hi, just picking up on the cost one, if you go and search for UK government BIM and cost trajectories, It was audited figures, and the UK government spent £3.6 billion on projects in the 2015 financial year. It saved 23.6% on capital expenditure, which was 855 million. And they are audited figures as opposed to the BIM task group wanting to show they could make a saving. Also, in terms of handover data, there are 2 international standards that cover this now. There's the ISO 19650 standards. Part 2 is about operation. Part 3 is asset information. And COBE is just a schema that gets you from one to the other. Where that will go, ultimately, COBE shouldn't exist, because you should just be able to hand over the data in a digital format. There shouldn't need to be any form of transfer. And just coming back to Golden Thread. So Golden Thread is Dame Judith Hackett's response to the Grenfell fire and the need for traceability and accountability of decision-making on products and systems through the construction life cycle and beyond. What will come from that, to get over your problem of not receiving information, is there will be a new bill, a new Act of Parliament called the Buildings Bill, and that will place a statutory duty on the client to demand the information and receive it, principal designer to create it, and principal contractor to actually hand the data over. This is only for housing because we're interested in where people sleep. But those problems are being solved, and actually the data structures already exist.
So thank you for that. It's worth noting how much leadership in the UK has driven this. And this is the big gap in Canada, is that we don't have any sort of national leadership driving this. But thank you for sharing that.
Hello, my name is Robert. I'm with Stantec. I have a question about technology. That's a simple question, and that's about the storage medium over time, because we're trying to convert to this new process, which is an important way to evolve our technology. So how about storage and being able to retrieve this information? What kind of format, what challenges do you see ahead? Because if you just look back 5 or 10 years or 15 years, it's changed many, many, many times. So it's probably going to do the same in the future, maybe even faster. So do you have any comment about the storage technology being able to access and retrieve information that was so well developed nowadays? What about in 10 or 15 or 20 years?
Anyone? Bueller?
I'll take a crack at that one. Basically, the amount, everybody talks about the data we are collecting, and of course it's terabytes, gigabytes, whatever. So what we're seeing in the industry with owners when they're collecting their asset information is they are, yes, I forget if I'm supposed to sprout angel wings here, but they are moving from the on-site prem servers to the cloud basis to be able to handle that amount of data. For sure. And obviously, exponentially, as we collect this data, that solution is still probably going to not be able to service our needs in 3 to 5 years, and something else must come along. But right now, what we're finding is the answer is that cloud computing and the power of that brings along.
Question back here.
Helen?
Yes, hi. My name is Tarek. I had a question regarding the financial aspect of the implementation, basically, of these solutions. A lot of times we see business cases, sensitivity analysis, some very high-level financial, attempts at justifying, all this collaboration and the transitioning of data from one phase to another. Do you guys do full financial analysis, basically, of this? Because beyond what I see in the industry, there's no organizations don't have a full financial analysis of these things. And second question I have is, what is the period that you guys look at, whether it's project, you have a pilot project, or it's organizational? What's the period of financial analysis, basically, to justify the business case, for example, that you guys consider typically?
Well, I can only speak for VEERUM, the solution that we offer. Our solution, again, is a cloud-based solution, and it's all about presenting a common viewing environment of all these disparate data silos. So when we go into a customer, we do a value proposition. It's mostly quantitative and qualitative analysis. We come up with a return on investment. I mean, our solution is deployable in 48 hours. It's a monthly subscription. You can get on, get off very quick, that type of thing. But for the asset itself and whether you're going to extend BIM into maintenance and operations, what we have found is our owners are quantifying those KPIs to be used all the way through design, construction, and into operations. And they're using a 15-year type of lens at that cost-benefit ratio. That's only with my interaction with owners. I'll throw it over to a couple owners.
Paul and John, so I know financial analysis has been coming up a lot. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on that point.
Yeah, I don't know if I can add anything specifically around analysis of BIM and the cost benefit over a life cycle of the asset at this point. I think it'd probably be hard to understand the exact sort of life cycle benefits were given the data. We do overall life cycle assessments or life cycle costing exercises for our capital projects. We take a 20-year timeline, usually do a 20-year NPV, and we use it really to look at different design approaches. A lot of it's focused, though, on energy and sustainability aspects of the project. We haven't really delved into trying to do a full life cycle analysis on BIM, and maybe Sheryl, you can help us with that one.
We can try.
I will say one of the metrics that are coming out in these owner consultations is all about safety, putting people in the line of fire in operations and maintenance, meaning getting them behind a vehicle to go out and collect a piece of data that they could have used the BIM model to extract those types of things, as well as the environmental GHG emissions, that type of thing.
All right, Paul, you get the last word.
I'm not sure I'd have much to add to the financial aspect, but I did want to, so the finance part's very difficult to articulate. And to be honest with you, I haven't had the success that I've hoped I could have had. Because reality is, just like you said, priority right now is on sustainability, energy, and life safety. Majority of our capital projects are all around either we're going to save energy, in which there's a calculated financial return, or not non-spend, or to address a safety issue, which is there's no price to that. So I, rightly or wrongly, and this speaks to a little bit about what Yuri asked about earlier, is the investment of time is, since I have purview over and control the maintenance budget, I see value in investing my staff in the projects early. I see the value in BIM, and I'm prepared to carve out some of my funding dedicated to that. That's really just a stopgap, because trying to articulate a business case to the financial powers that be is very difficult. And especially in my world, I mean, you guys are, I don't know how many owners are here, but you're owners, and even UBC, you represent the owner. Your entire career is representing the owner. The difficult part with my role is I represent different owners every 4 years. So every 4 years when council comes in, they're going to have a new set of directives and initiatives and a reprioritization of funding for me. So I don't want to say that it's not worth it. It's just, it's different from my world, because we're getting a new citywide plan that's just coming out, and that's going to set new direction, new goals, new values. And then what we talked about with previous council about the benefits of maintenance are no longer valid. And so I'm constantly having to re-justify every 4 years. But really, that's pretty specific to my role, probably not for most building owners.
Well, I know people working in the municipalities and for the province, that's an issue as well. So if everyone can join me in thanking this amazing and brave panel.